Dr. Tarpley, thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vox. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm very honored to have you here, and I'm a little excited about tonight's show, I have to admit. I'd like to talk.
We have to clear the Hegelian baggage and lumber out of the way. I think people should recall that Hegel was really a very reactionary guy. He was, by all odds, somebody who worked together very closely with Prince Metternich of Austria, who was the centerpiece of these restored monarchies and reactionary regimes in Austria, the Austrian Empire, in Prussia, and in Russia, right? The so-called Holy Alliance. And Hegel is pretty much somebody who represents the Holy Alliance in philosophy, except that he's got this tremendous soft spot for Rousseau. So I really don't think that very many people in the U.S. ruling class have ever learned anything about Hegel, but certainly.
Well, I don't think they have to. I mean, it's clear that now, whether or not they consciously are adhering to this Hegelian dialectic. Actually, Hegel never actually uttered the phrase thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Right.
He actually never said that. We put that into his mouth, actually. But I think that it's pretty clear to the ruling class that you can't just get what you want. You have to go through some steps first. So you got to jump through some hoops, or make us jump through the hoops. What do you say?
Well, of course, the ruling class periodically reverses its field. I mean, you go from neocon domination with Bush and Cheney, and that means direct attacks and bombing and invasion. And then when that exhausts you, right, you become bankrupt and isolated. Then
okay, we got a few seconds. We got a few seconds. We're going to cut to a break. We'll pick that up at the top of the next. Okay.
Okay.
Back to the show. So I'd like to go with our guest, Dr. Tarpley, and we can talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff that's facing us all. And we could talk for 10, 15 minutes on that. I'd like to get to Syria and talk about the soft insurgencies that are going on throughout the world today, because I know our guest, Dr. Tarpley, is one of the leading experts on how that works, and he's going to tell you a lot about that. But let's talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff. Talk to us a little bit about that,
yeah.
Dr. Tarpley.
First of all, we push aside Hegel, who gets us nowhere, and I think for the fiscal cliff, we can go back to one of Plato's dialogues, that is the Gorgias. And that's the Gorgias is the study of sophism, the sophists, right, who were essentially the K Street of ancient Athens was this group of the sophists. So in this dialogue, we have Socrates meeting Gorgias, and Gorgias is somebody who essentially dishes up rhetoric and slogans that powerful circles can use. Now, the relevant point is this fiscal cliff is a fraud from beginning to end, and this term, I am sure, was developed by somebody like Frank Luntz, right? If you look at Gorgias in the old Plato dialogue, and you look at this word monger, perception monger, Frank Luntz, right? The reactionary focus group guy who, he says, don't call it capitalism, call it free enterprise, and he's got all this other advice. The term fiscal cliff is designed to stampede people. It's designed to frighten them, and it's the person who introduced it. I don't think he developed it, but he introduced it. That is, of course, Helicopter Ben Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, who began talking about the fiscal cliff almost a year ago. And the goal of this is to use a largely artificial emergency, which has been artificially created, to be sure, and to try to use that to extract concessions in the direction of genocidal austerity, killer cuts against the American people in the federal budget, which is what this ruling elite wants. The problem with the ruling elite is that they've been screaming about deficits and debt. And here, of course, is a package that will indeed go far towards having some impact on deficits and debt, at least in the very short run. But this is not what they really want. They want austerity that shifts the cost of the depression off the backs of the financiers and zombie bankers and hedge fund hyenas who have created this situation and put it onto the average working people. So let's just reject the fiscal cliff. I would say the following right now. The situation is this. You have within the Republican Party about 40 to 50 members of the House of Representatives especially. These are right-wing reactionary extremists. In most countries of the world, they would be immediately identified as fascists. And I think we might as well do that here, too. And their guiding principle, they have a shibboleth, which they intend to maintain, and it is that the privileges of the ruling elite are inviolable, that not one penny of tax revenue can come from the rich and the super rich, and they have to cloak this with a general opposition to tax rates. But essentially what they're saying is we're the elite and we don't pay. Now, interestingly enough, Wall Street, generally speaking, is the cause of any fiscal shortfalls. It's that Wall Street as an institution and Wall Street as the creators of this derivatives depression that we're in and have been in since 2007. You look at the main Wall Street zombie banks, and I've written an article about this, which people can see at tarpley.net. You look at Bank of America, Citibank, General Electric, which is a hedge fund, right? It's not an industrial corporation anymore. You look at Wells Fargo, you look at Goldman Sachs, and what you see is that they pay virtually nothing in federal corporate income tax. Now, this is one that seems to have gotten completely lost, right? We're only talking about federal income tax on individuals in this fiscal cliff hysteria. But we ought to think about this other form of taxation, right? The tax on corporations. There's a federal corporate income tax on corporate profits, which is supposed to be 35%. But, surprise, surprise, these zombie banks, in addition to getting subsidies from the TARP, the Treasury, and 0% credit from the Federal Reserve, they also pay no taxes, or 1% or 2%. 1 year, General Electric paid minus 43%. In other words, they got back more from the federal government. So this is a huge area to eliminate the loopholes in the corporate income tax. But, of course, that is a very difficult process. So the direct solution is the Wall Street sales tax. And the difference is this. Once you're talking about profits, corporations will find tax shelters. They'll find jips, dodges, deals, scams, tax evasion, embezzlement, the LIBOR complex, this entire thing. But what really cannot be hidden are transactions on, futures, options, indices. Those have to go over exchanges, right? Largely the ones in Chicago, the futures and options exchanges in Chicago. So all of that pays no tax. The average person pays, depending on your state, from 6% or 7% up to, in California, it's now reached 12%. In some states, like the benighted Virginia and other southern states, you have to pay that on groceries, which is a huge bite into the budget of the poor. Whereas Wall Street can do flash trading, program trading, 1 million trades per second. They pay absolutely nothing. So this amounts to favorable tax treatment. It means that there's a subsidy for speculation, or in reverse, you can say that productive activity, right, tangible physical production of a farmer or a manufacturer or a construction company or a mine or a scientific laboratory, that is punished because there you have to pay this sales tax. So the entire idiocy and hollowness of this entire hysterical performance, this propaganda campaign, it has to avoid the fact Wall Street pays no tax, and the answer is the Wall Street sales tax.
Well, is there any political will out there to make this happen? I mean, is there any momentum in that direction?
If a lot of people who are essentially demoralized and disoriented and don't know what to do would get active. You could at least get this idea into circulation. And once this idea reaches critical mass, it can move very fast because most people do not understand what I've just said. They do not understand that Wall Street pays no tax. Once they find out that Wall Street pays no tax, they become extremely angry, and they don't want to entertain any notion of sacrifices for them. No, not for us. Not our pensions, not our health care, but rather that these Wall Street parasites should be forced to cough up. So the one thing that I wanted to mention is, whereas the futures, options, indices, and other combinations go across public exchanges, they cannot be hidden. Somebody would say, well, there are over-the-counter derivatives, which are private counterparty agreements, right, which are just can be signed in secrecy. Fine, you have a law that says if you didn't register your over-the-counter derivative, and this is what, 600 trillion to 1 quadrillion a year of that at least, then if you didn't register it and pay the 1% tax, then it can't be held up in court. So that means that whoever's on the losing side would refuse to pay.
The problems I see is that as soon as you start talking about derivatives, credit default swaps, and stuff like, people's eyes glaze to the back of their heads, and they don't know what these words mean. They don't know what the word austerity means. Actually, most people actually.
Fine.
So you have to find a sexy way to package it. Otherwise, you're not going to get any traction with words that people just don't understand.
That's why we say killer cuts. These are killer cuts. This is genocide. This is killing people. So what we need is a 1% Wall Street sales tax. And here we've taken that lesson taught. Some people call this a Tobin tax. Nobody knows what that is.
Yeah,
that's Some people
ridiculous,
call it a Robin Hood tax. That's a terrible choice, right? Robbing from the rich. Oh, my God.
How about you're getting the shaft tax? I mean, or prevent us. I mean, there's got to be some way to really get it out there, because right now I don't see any traction on this issue, and I don't see any
but you're not
possibilities.
You're not in touch with the labor front. We have National Nurses United with 200,000 members. They are, I think, completely mobilized for this. They have a day of action on December 10th. And I personally represent the United Front Against Austerity, UFAA.
All right, let's go into a break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about some other topics. And thank you for joining us. Welcome back to the show. I'm joined with guest Webster Tarpley from Washington, D.C., and we're talking about the fiscal cliff. Webster's got a lot to say. Go on, Webster. Take it.
The basic solution to this fiscal shortfall, like you want to have a slightly smaller federal budget deficit. I think that's probably fine. We want to have plenty of money in the federal budget because we've got to pay unemployment benefits for 99 weeks. Plus, we've got to have food stamps at a much better level for everybody who needs it. Right now, the average food stamps payment is about $1.50 per person per meal. Most people get about $30 a week, and that is a ticket to vitamin deficiency diseases that a lot of people have forgotten even exist. So there will be a lot of pressure on the federal budget to maintain the social safety net. Indeed, the Social Security pension needs to be increased. The interesting thing is Obama has gone into these negotiations intending to rip off his own base, to betray them, to stab them in the back. All of this was laid out by Obama in his interview with the Washington Post editorial board in the week before his inauguration in 2009. And I have it written up in Surviving the Cataclysm, the second edition from 2009. You can find it all in there. He basically said the purpose of his presidency was to take down Social Security and Medicare, but to do it gradually and to impose that kind of austerity. So that's what he's been about the whole time. The irony last week was that Obama was pushing something called the chained CPI, the chained Consumer Price Index, which is a way to loot Social Security over time, over decades. It's a way to make it wither on the vine. It's a way to make Social Security die the death of 1,000 cuts. That's what Obama was doing. And he was using this mechanism. Right? This would be something that Boehner had demanded, saying we've got to have a way to cut and gouge and chisel the cost of living escalator that's built into Social Security. You remember that Obama had promised that he would not cut Social Security. That was one of the bases of his campaign. But, of course, that's now forgotten. And so what we saw was a kind of a coming together of the Wall Street Democrat Obama and the reactionary Republican Boehner. But, of course, the thing that had then occurred was there were the 40 to 50 fascist Republicans who said, no, we won't vote for that because this is not fascist enough. This does not kill enough Americans. It doesn't have enough deadly cuts and deadly austerity in it. So that's the irony, that Obama has been prevented from selling out his base in a very dramatic way precisely by these ogres, right, this Tea Party caucus there in the Republican ranks. Now, the other thing that they pulled out, and we just want to mention this, we now hear from Geithner that the so-called debt ceiling is going to be reached next Monday on New Year's Eve. So this is another method of blackmail and extortion used by these Republicans. Truly, those Republicans, that Tea Party caucus, those people are right-wing anarchists. They are people who hate government. They want to go back to the state of nature. They are wreckers and saboteurs inside any government that they're elected to. They represent, a benighted and backward part of this population. But the thing, Obama had tried to get the Republicans to grant him the power to raise the debt ceiling, which, of course, they refused to do. But here's the bottom line on this is the following. All of these reactionaries talk about the Constitution. Well, how about the Constitution, the 14th Amendment, and what it says in the 14th Amendment, and this is after the Civil War, it's designed to defend the integrity of the public debt of the United States, and it says, the public debt of the United States will not be questioned, and that means you've got to pay it. Once you've spent the money, once you've incurred the cost, once you've issued the bonds, you have got to pay. And what that obviously means is that the concept of a debt ceiling is unconstitutional. It is a monstrosity from a 14th Amendment point of view. And one of the things this shows us is why these Tea Party reactionaries hate the 14th Amendment so much. There's a lot of stuff in there that they hate because it prevents states from doing horrendous things, and it gives black people and others the right to be citizens and so forth. Anyway, the point is that Obama should come out and say, if we had a real president, somebody on the caliber of Roosevelt or Kennedy, they would come out and say, well, I invite you to negotiate in good faith, but I'm telling the world one thing. The United States will not default. I will order the Secretary of the Treasury to raise money. We can continue our normal operations unless and until you people decide to respect the Constitution. And that is something that is within Obama's reach at any point. You cannot have a gang of reactionary thugs who are blackmailing the United States government. And you want to know the level of these people. One of those Tea Party groups is called Freedom Works. And the top honcho, well, there were two. There was this guy, Dick Armey. Dick Armey, remember him? He was Newt Gingrich's right-hand man in the Republican Revolution. And then you've got this other guy. You've seen him on television. He looks like...
By the way, Dick Armey is the man with the most ironic name in Washington, by the way.
Yeah. There's this other guy who's, I'm forgetting his name. He's a non-entity, but he's a right-wing raving ideologue. And he's got these big sideburns, right? He's got these whiskers. They call them mutton chops, this character. So we had a coup d'etat inside Freedom Works back in September, which has come out in the Washington papers now in the last couple of days, where Dick Armey goes into the headquarters of Freedom Works with an armed goon. He's got an off-duty Capitol Hill policeman packing heat. And he comes in and confronts the guy with the mutton chops, saying, you're going to get out of here. I want you and you out of the building, and I got my armed guard here, my guy with the gun, ready to take you out. Now, if one of these characters had decided to live the philosophy that they talk about, right, this seems to be their fetish, then the other guy could have pulled out his revolver, and we could have had an immediate, assault rifle. What do I say? So we could have had gunplay. We could have had a massacre inside the offices of FreedomWorks. This is the level of the people who are blackmailing and extorting the United States government. This is out of this world.
Dick Armey didn't Dick Armey wasn't his exit from Congress not so graceful? Wasn't he accused of wrongdoing or convicted of wrongdoing?
No, I don't think he ever was. I think he. I can't recall how he left, but he was part of the Gingrich clique, and of course, what he found was that he could make much more money. Now, the way in which this thing has ended is that a reactionary billionaire, right, a character who it's the guy who owns the Cancer Treatment Centers of America, has provided the money, millions and millions over many years, so that the mutton shop character can maintain himself as the head of FreedomWorks. So it's like everybody who counts has got one of these of their own, right? The Koch brothers have Americans for Prosperity. Now the Cancer Treatment Centers of America guy has got FreedomWorks, and then there's Tea Party Express, and it's all a market of dupes, because what it is that the grassroots people, the little people, the ideologues, the true believers, they are cannon fodder, and the billionaires run these things and use these poor little jerks as foot soldiers in their own, what turn out to be palace intrigues, right? Because they want to get, their candidate. Can you imagine that on the board of FreedomWorks we had C. Boyden Gray? Remember him? Boyd Gray? He was
yes, I do.
Super patrician, super blue blood, the Ichabod Crane of the Bush, the elder White House. He was the White House counsel, the lawyer, in-house White House lawyer for Mad Dog Bush, the elder. So that guy is on the board of a Tea Party group. This is absolute insanity, right? These are not grassroots organizations. This is pure astroturf. This is pure top-down. But anyway, those, I think, are the answers. And if you want to have a couple of other answers, you want to know what to do about Social Security, it's easy. Remove the cap. Right now, wage income is only taxed up to about $105,000 or $110,000 per person. Just remove that cap. Any wage income up to sky's the limit, right? With no limit, will be taxed at the rate of the FICA tax, right? The payroll tax that funds Social Security. And if you're worried about Medicare, you want to save some money for Medicare, let Medicare Part D, which is the Medicare prescription drug benefit, let that thing haggle with Big Pharma, right? The Veterans Administration can haggle with Big Pharma. They get, 25, 30, 40% discounts on the masses of medications that they buy. Let Medicare Part D do that. They're even bigger. They're huge. And then you can cut a tremendous part of those costs. But what you cannot do is start killing people in the name of cost reduction, which is obviously what Obama does, right? There is a death battle in there. There certainly is. But that, under the Nuremberg precedent, that is a high crime against humanity, and there may indeed come a day of reckoning for that.
Okay, well, we're going to go into a break. When we come back, we'd like to talk to Webster Tarpley about some of the bigger global issues, in particular what I've named soft insurgency. I coined that in terms of... Okay, welcome back to the show. Webster Tarpley's is a prolific author, and he's got a lot of books out there, and I urge listeners to go to his website, which is not www, leave the wwws off, just tarpley.net, TARPLEY.net, no wwws, or you can just search it in Google, just search Tarpley, and his is the first Q. You want to go to his site, there's a lot of good stuff. We also link to his site from my site, which is www.voxnews.com. So either one will get you to Tarpley. Webster, I'd like to talk about this idea of this soft insurgency, this new way, this somewhat less bloody way, somewhat less mass casualty way, more done with media and death squads here and there. And one of the things I noticed when I saw when I was watching the Egyptian so-called revolution, which was not a revolution at all, it was a staged event. And one of the things I noticed was that during the rallies, the massive rallies in Tahrir Square, there was moments when the people in the square were actually watching large screen projections of themselves on CNN engaging in their own revolution live on international television. And then as soon as the ruling class here in America got rid of Hosni Mubarak, suddenly the screens, and God knows who put those screens up there, because they don't just pop up there by themselves. Somebody had to have staged all that. As soon as they got rid of Mubarak and replaced it with another brutal dictator more to their liking, suddenly they cut to Charlie Sheen, who was having a breakdown. He had just kicked a hole in another hotel room and he got caught with some cocaine or something. And then the people in Tahrir Square were watching now Charlie Sheen on their screens, and revolution was literally at that point over. And it was then I realized that these new forms of revolution are actually driven by the centerpiece, which is a media event, a staged media event. And it's this thing which is the inciting moment, it's the kickoff moment, it's the thing that gets the go code, and it's the thing it's staged around. What do you think about that?
Well, I think you have to look at the whole concept of the color revolution, the Albert Einstein Institute of Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Gene Sharp, and Colonel Robert, what's his name? Colonel Robert McKelvey, I guess it is. They tell you the rules for creating the simulacrum of a destabilization. In other words,
yes,
plausible, fake destabilization. But if you look at Tunisia, what happened in Tunisia? This was a palace coup with a bunch of dupes that were out in the public square demonstrating. What really happened was that the U.S., the CIA, the Pentagon had subverted the generals of Tunisia so that it's easy to get street demonstrations. You can get riots in poor countries, especially in a depression, right, when the bread price is going up and unemployment is high. You can get riots, you can get street demonstrations, but that's not enough to contend for power. And the way that it worked with Ben Ali of Tunisia was he turned to the generals and he said, look, I've got these hooligans here in the square. You want to help me get rid of them? And they said, no, you are out. So it's a palace coup masked and camouflaged by the presence of these petty bourgeois student agitators. A lot of them who actually believe that they're doing it, but of course,
they have no idea. They're just set up. We actually have a call from Seattle. The
question of the Muslim Brotherhood. There's obviously an alliance between the CIA and the United States and the Muslim Brotherhood, and you have to know who those people are. That's Saudi Arabia pays for it. Those are stockbrokers. They're the rich. They're the 1 or 2% of the society, with people around them that they recruit to their operations of social welfare and so forth, and that is what has taken over Egypt. I just want to stress.
Strangely enough, many of the objectives of the Muslim Brotherhood dovetail quite nicely with the objectives of our ruling class. That's one key.
Let's get a very, very concrete, right? Morsi. So here we have Morsi in Egypt, and what has he just done? Most people don't realize that I think one of the root causes of the tumults in Egypt of the last 6 weeks, 8 weeks, has been a sellout by Morsi to the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund said, we'll give you a $5 billion loan, but you've got to begin demolishing the price subsidies, which are absolutely essential for these economies. They all go back to Nasser, and you had them in Libya, had them in Syria today. You had them in Egypt, but they're under attack. These are price subsidies for fuel, for basic foodstuffs, cooking oil, heating oil, things like this. You have them in Iran, although they're being phased out in favor of cash payments. So you don't have world market prices for a lot of things that people need, and that's good because the world market is corrupt. So what Morsi just approved was a deal where the price of gasoline doubled during the month of November. Now, any place in the world that you double the price of gasoline, you're going to have problems. Then there was an increase in the sales tax demanded by the IMF on its way to becoming a value-added tax. Now, this is bad policy. This is regressive taxation. This is a kind of a tax that cuts into the necessities of the poor and maybe the amenities of the middle class, but certainly does not touch the sybaritic luxury of the ruling elite. So I want to point to people. The good news from Egypt is the emergence of an opposition. There's a guy there named Hamdin Salahi. Okay, and this guy is Sabahi. Sorry, Sabahi says no to the dictatorship of the army. He fought Mubarak. He was in jail under Mubarak, and he says no to the dictatorship of the theocrats and these oligarchs of the Muslim Brotherhood, who are simply rich people who dress themselves in the cloak of religion. And the big thing with Hamdin Sabahi is to say no to the IMF. We will not accept IMF conditionalities. We don't want the loan. We want to have economic protectionism. We want to have policies for raising the lower incomes in the society. And the big polemic between Sabahi and Morsi is Morsi says we want the market to rule, and Sabahi says no, we do not want the market to rule because the market is the controlled by rich plutocrats. And if there are people fugitives from the Ron Paul movement listening in, look at that right here. You have a clear distinction. The side of evil is the side that goes with I want the market, and somebody who wants to defend the population, and he has some concept of Egypt as a great nation, says no, we don't want the market in that sense. We don't want the unbridled free market. So Sabahi, of course, represents the Nasser tradition, and I'm very, very pleased to see that the thinking of Colonel Nasser of Egypt from the 50s and 60s and 70s is not dead, but there is a third force. Right? And this is the guy who came in third in the presidential election, and he has been a key part of the opposition against the Constitution, which is not a good Constitution.
Well, one of the points is that none of this was intended. The original intention is to throw these. The original intention is not to have free democratic countries over there. That's not what they want. Obviously, if there was free countries over there, they would not support any of these things. So the point is to take these secular nations and throw them into maybe Islamic fundamentalism, which will require quite a lot of military maintenance over the decades to dig it
for a weaker country. The point is that if you have Egypt with 10% or 15% Copts, Christians, and you try to impose this constitution, it's a recipe for endless trouble. And of course, in Syria, it's much worse because there you have it's about 15 to 20% are Christians. They're Maronite Christians, Melkite Christians, Greek Orthodox.
They better be reserving their U-Hauls because after they get rid of Assad, I wouldn't want to be a Christian in Syria. I'd like to go to a caller. We have Maria in Seattle calling. Maria, you're on the air. Hello, Maria. Are you out there?
Recipe for endless trouble, and of course in Syria it's much worse because it's about 15.
I lost you, Webster.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
Okay, I just lost you for a second. We had Maria in Seattle. Maria, are you there?
Because after they get rid of Assad, I wouldn't want to be a Christian in Syria. I'd like to go to a caller. We have a Maria in Seattle calling.
Okay, Maria, you have to listen on your phone, not on your radio.
Yes.
Because there's a delay. Turn off your radio now, please, and just listen through your phone.
Okay, got it.
Okay, go ahead. Ask Webster or myself any question you'd like.
Hello, good evening. This is Maria from Seattle. I'm a journalist. First, would like to salute Webster Tarpley. Thank you very much for years of beautiful work following you. You're my hero. Thank you. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. What's your question for myself or Webster tonight? Or your comment, whatever it is. Question or comment, whatever.
Sure. I would like to compare what's going on right now with the fiscal cliff to a Russian situation maybe at some point while the President Yeltsin was in power. And him and oligarchs could have saved infrastructure from failure, but they didn't do it. And that's exactly what I observed today is happening here when riches wouldn't like to pay their fair share. And basically, the sabotage is the word that comes to mind when you observe the news today. So,
okay, Okay, go ahead. Continue a little bit. We got a few more seconds, 30 more seconds. Go ahead.
All right, sure. And after 10 years of so-called war on terrorism, well, it's time to be patriotic now. Republicans are totally backing off and chickening out, and basically they don't care if their beloved country is going down. They're indifferent, they're selfish, and this is a total sabotage. What do you think about that?
Okay, Webster, we'll pick that up at the. We'll pick that up at the end of the break when the break comes back.
Okay, thank you.
You're at I.N.N. New World Report with Webster Tarpley, and I am your host, Vox, tonight, standing in for Tom Kiley. Back to the air with Webster Tarpley. We're going to start off with a little bit of these fake people power revolutions, where they do a couple things. They finance troublemakers. They bribe target officials in target countries for a high-level defection. They stage fake rape incidents. They arrange a giant photo opportunity. They send in Al-Qaeda, send in the death squads, create a no-fly zone and the dreaded humanitarian aid, and of course, always with the grainy, blurry cell phone, unverified action video. Webster, what's going on, and why are we falling for this obvious fakery all the time?
Well, I'm writing an article now this week, and you can see it on Tarpley.net in a day or two. The model for what's being done to Syria, this is really not a color revolution. Now, this was death squads from the very beginning. This is actually out of the history of Central America. Right? We had the way it worked was John Negroponte had perfected the death squad technique in Central America in the 70s and 80s, and then he moved on to become the U.S. proconsul there in Iraq. In the 80s, right, in the past decade.
John Death Squad Negroponte, that one?
That's the one. And his protege was Ambassador Ford, who today is the U.S. State Department point man for running the Syrian opposition. So there's these death squads from the very beginning. Centered in Libya. The first demonstrations in Libya were not political demonstrations going to the public square to demand freedom and democracy. Because they had been demonstrations under Gaddafi all along. Right? It's not like you couldn't demonstrate. You could. But in this case, they were marches on military bases to take them by surprise and start getting a hold of weapons stocks. And in Syria, it was a massacre from the beginning. In other words, if there were some pro-democracy dupes out there, imagining that they could have a peaceful demonstration, they couldn't. And it was because immediately among their own ranks there appeared these death squad characters. And these people have now been shown they come from Chechnya in southern Russia. It's been estimated that about 1,000 Pakistani Taliban have been killed fighting against the Assad government and the Syrian army. They come from Somalia. In other words, there's a several thousand-mile swath of the earth where everybody who is an unemployed fanatic is being recruited, and they've just brought in another echelon, right? Another.
Well, the thing I love is that they show the amazing success that they have in fooling us is that they call these people protesters, yet we see video footage of them with like turret-mounted, like 50 caliber, like high artillery weapons mounted on the back of Hummers. These are not protesters. These are combatants. And, so it's
those things that you're talking about, the Toyota pickup trucks with the heavy machine guns on the back, those were brought from Libya.
Of course.
There was an airlift of death squad representatives, fighters, and their typical hardware was brought by ocean lift across the Mediterranean, airlift to the city of Iskenderun, Turkey, and the Incirlik NATO Air Force Base, Adana, Turkey, and so forth. So it's a military operation. It's a CIA secret army which has been assembled in southern Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon, and in the Kurdish part of northern Iraq, and then sent in for murder and mayhem. And the goal, of course, is chaos. The model of this is what Hitler did to Czechoslovakia in 1938. But I just wanted to not forget completely Maria's question, right? She was talking about Yeltsin and the oligarchs, right, and the obvious comparisons of that regime to what we have here in the United States. The beginning of wisdom in political analysis is that famous Book 7 of Plato's Republic, where we hear about tyranny, of course. We hear about mob rule or autocracy, which is also bad. And above all, we hear about oligarchy, right? The constitution full of many evils where the rich rule and the poor have absolutely no voice. And if you look at the array of human societies over 5,000 or 10,000 years, what you will find is that most of them are oligarchies. Even the ones that look like they're tyrannies are often not. They're more oligarchical than tyrannical when you begin to delve inside. You could say in the case of the Soviet Union, right, considered a tyrannical dictatorship. No, it's an autocracy. An oligarchy of the party. You can see Lenin in his left-wing communism right after World War I writes that the Bolshevik government is an oligarchy, and it is because it's got this Politburo. The times when one person could give orders without any pushback are just a very few years under Lenin, maybe during the Civil War, but probably not even then. Under Stalin, primarily, in the 30s and 40s. But the vast majority of the history of the Soviet Union, it's an oligarchy. Even Hitler would be maybe Hitler considered more absolute and extreme. But in his case, he had to worry about army officers of the kind who eventually tried to kill him, but also the Gauleiters, right? The province chiefs, you can call them, the Gauleiters of Germany. But the rule then is, and this you can trace back, you can find this in, you can get it back to Herodotus and Thucydides, that oligarchy is the enemy of the modern nation state. And what you see in the case of the Russian oligarchs with Yeltsin, but also of the 1% today, right, the Koch brothers and people like this, is that their oligarchical privileges mean infinitely more to them than any consideration of a nation or patriotism or these other values that are more common in the less privileged parts of the population. And what you see is the problem with the English speaking world is that the English speaking world will tell you your choice is between tyranny and democracy. Well, those are not the choices. There's that other area, which turns out to be, most of the world, most of the time, over many, many centuries, is that oligarchy sits there in the middle, right? It can be an oligarchy of generals, of priests, of bureaucrats, all different kinds. But that is the one which is incompatible with the modern state. And what we see, the strategy for the oligarchy in terms of their own survival, the Anglo-American ones in particular, is that they want the breakup of the modern state. They find that the breakup of the modern state, which is an institution that's been around but 600 or 700 years at the very most, they want that gone. So they say Scotland will secede. Belgium will break up into two parts. Sudan has been busted up. Iraq is divided into three. Turkey will be carved. Pakistan, there will be 4 or 5. Iran, there will be 5 or 6. And on and on and on, right? And this is this idiocy of secessionism that we've seen. Secessionism, as in the case of the Soviet Union, is the way that the oligarchy tries to maintain itself when nation states come under stress. Right? I think.
Well, this is Brzezinski's point: is the dissolution of the idea in people's heads of the nation state. People are more concerned with their personal hobbies than with any idea of allegiance to their own state.
Yes, right. That you want dignity. He says you want dignity, and dignity means. If you're a left-handed Presbyterian pinochle player, then you've got to have a polity, a state, a nation, which is made up similarly of left-handed Presbyterian pinochle players. It's absurd.
Sure.
And the other thing that what gets lost in that is it becomes a human zoo, because where's the general welfare? Where's the notion of economic progress, without which nothing else works, right? Anyway, what we just had in the election, I think, is a defeat for the war party, right? In other words, the out-and-out bombing and aggression party with Romney and Ryan and Petraeus clearly in the background and helping them along, and that clique of generals, like General Ham, Admiral Stavridis, Admiral Gowet. The Gallup poll got involved because they were sort of greasing the skids for vote fraud by telling people that Romney was ahead. The head of Lockheed, right, the biggest defense contractor in the world by most measures, was also involved, and so forth. But this, and Karl Rove, right? Karl Rove with his ORCA system, which was supposed to deliver the majority to Romney, but somehow that failed. So
this election proved that their typical systems of vote rigging did not succeed, because the ruling class wanted Romney to win, and they didn't get what they wanted. So that means that there is some weakness on their part in their normal ways, their electronic means.
Yeah, maybe it might be more accurate to say that the ruling class was not unanimous. In other words, remember, the Anglo-American system is based on the Venetian one, and it is based on the British Whigs, the English Whigs of the 1600s and 1700s, and in their case, it's a polycentric system. In other words, it does not want a single dictatorial center. It's organized to try to prevent that, but that also means that it's divided, right? And so you have different. It's largely a fake division, but you can distinguish a Soros wing from a Koch brothers, Mellon Scaife, Cancer Treatment Centers of America wing.
So you don't think that they want a one world government?
I don't know what you mean by that. What they want is
there's this idea of the consolidation of power. The idea is that every single organization of humankind can and has been proven to be usurped, so that if they can get it all under one umbrella, then they just usurp that and they own the whole show.
I think this is a mistake. Because remember, this is a very bad slogan, right? Where did that one world government slogan come from? This is Cleon Skousen. This is a Mormon. This is a right-wing reactionary Mormon, who was attempting to muddy the waters as best he could back in the 60s.
Well, didn't David
70s.
Rockefeller say it at the commencement of the Bilderberg meeting once?
Let's not. This is a primitive form of analysis. Here's what we see: they want to smash the nation state. That's for sure, and they want to go to rump states, warlords, micro states, mini states, and what have you.
Okay,
and,
we're going to a break now.
The IMF and NATO. I've just a few more minutes now. I got to run.
Okay, we'll be back with Webster Tarpley right after the break. All right, welcome back to the show. We're talking to Webster Tarpley. His website is www.tarpley. No www, just tarpley.net. There's a lot of books, a lot of information, and a lot of television appearances that he appears on every week, and you're going to want to check that out. It's very, very good information. Go ahead, Webster. Finish your last thought.
Anyway, I have to conclude now, but just the idea is this. I would put aside these slogans. New World Order is a bad slogan. One world government, bad slogan. Here's what you have. The tendency is to smash every nation state. It means if you think you're a secessionist, then you're working for the side of evil. You're working for the powers of evil.
Why? I want New York to secede from the United States. What's wrong with that?
Lots of luck. I don't have time. I realize you want to try to.
No, what I'm saying, the urge to secede is a genuine urge. The French the French Quebecois wanted to do that, and they had a good reason to, because culturally they were more advanced.
They did not, and the vote was against it, and it would be against it again. And secessionism in the United States is extremely artificial. It takes a network of Southern jurisdictions, Scottish Rite Freemasons, and British agents, and other vermin in my book to get secessionism in 1860 and 1861. It is not popular. It has to be rammed through. It leads to countervailing movements like West Virginia is one example. The upcountry of many states, Tennessee, so forth, they don't want any part of this. So there's a lot of mythology around this. But the goal of the financier community, Wall Street, London, and the think tanks that they support, is to smash the nation state, divide that into microstates, mini-states, rump states, failed states, warlords. Chaos.
I would love that. That sounds like perfect situation. No?
If you want to live to be 35 in cannibalism and infanticide. And then above that, you have the International Monetary Fund and NATO. And if you want to call that a government, I suppose that's the idea. But notice, this is not anything good. There's no place in this for Russia or China. In other words, it's not like these other powers are equal partners. They are not. This is nothing new. This is the U.S. British world empire. It's been around since World War II. It is attempting to revamp itself, to morph in order to survive under conditions of economic depression and imperialist breakdown crisis, which is what we're in right now. And interestingly enough, one of the harbingers of this is Ron Paul himself. Famous speech, you should look at it. He's got it on his congressional website. Take now the last days of his time in Congress. If you want to see what Ron Paul was all about, go to this speech about, it's about March or April of 2001. It's about 6 months before the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And he says, we have nothing to fear from globalism, universal free trade, and a commodity currency, by which he means gold. So he wants globalism, he says this, globalism, free trade, universal, no tariffs, no regulations, no nothing, and a gold currency. So the gold currency is independent of any government, and the free trade diminishes the powers of government. Now that's his way of getting to what you'd call a universal empire or universal monarchy. But of course, this world that he's describing could not support 6 to 7 billion people. This would be a world for maybe 1 or 2 billion. So that would be a genocide of 4 to 5 billion. And if you look at his economic program, that's pretty much what he wants in his economic program. Just one last example. If you look at Ron Paul's program, Restore America, the thing that he ran on, where he finally got specific in contrast to these throwaway lines, he took this, among other things, the food stamp program. He wanted to cut that by 62 to 63%. So instead of having $1.50 per person per meal, you would go to about 50 cents per person per meal. And that's a recipe for death on a large scale. So that is the motivating force of this stuff. So I am proud to take my stand on the modern nation state. Absolutely. Obviously, reform agenda, modernization, and so forth. But you look at Syria, the transition to microstates and mini-states, that's what you see in Syria. There is nothing worse. No outcome is worse than civil war. Civil war is the
But that's not a real
worst.
civil war, though. That's a media fueled, intelligence agency fueled conflict. It's not
because there are enough indigenous forces. I mean, they've been dragged in. Right? I already went through
Webster.
Most of
If there was a superpower,
I just went through that.
But if there was a superpower to the north of America that suddenly was funneling surface-to-air missiles to thousands of Americans, you would have Americans firing them upon their government too. So this idea that just because there are some people in these nations that are getting weapons and firing them against their government, people would do that here. I would say almost as many, if not more.
Well, I can't speculate on that, but let me just remind people, you can find me at tarpley.net, and Twitter feed is Webster G. Tarpley. We will be having protest actions as the situation evolves. If there's going to be an attempt made between Sunday night and Monday to have a last sellout stab in the back grand bargain package, I don't think this is likely to succeed, but it might. And that would be Obama's last chance to impose killer cuts on Social Security specifically. That's what he would be giving Boehner. He'd say to Boehner, I want you to agree with me now that we're going to have some small tax increase on the super rich, but in exchange for that, we're going to gouge the Social Security pension until it withers on the vine. If that happens, we've got to get out in the streets and show the public and the world, indeed, that somebody's fighting. So watch the Webster G. Tarpley Twitter feed, and I urge you, follow it, subscribe to it. It's easy, right? You just follow it, and then you get this stuff automatically, and you can keep up with the United Front Against Austerity. Okay?
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much, Webster. It's a privilege to have you on your show. Thank you so much.
See you soon. Good luck. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Have to go through some steps first. So you got to jump through some hoops, or make us jump through the hoops. What do you say?
Well, of course, the ruling class periodically reverses its field. I mean, you go from neocon domination with Bush and Cheney, and that means direct attacks and bombing and invasion. And then when that exhausts you, right, you become bankrupt and isolated. Then,
okay, we got a few seconds. We got a few seconds. We're going to cut to a break. We'll pick that up at the top of the next. Okay.
Okay.
Back to the show. So I'd like to go with our guest, Dr. Tarpley, and we can talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff that's facing us all. And we could talk for 10, 15 minutes on that. I'd like to get to Syria and talk about the soft insurgencies that are going on throughout the world today, because I know our guest, Dr. Tarpley, is one of the leading experts on how that works, and he's going to tell you a lot about that. But let's talk a little bit about the fiscal cliff. Talk to us a little bit about that, yeah. Dr. Tarpley.
First of all, we push aside Hegel, who gets us nowhere, and I think for the fiscal cliff, we can go back to one of Plato's dialogues, that is the Gorgias. And that's the Gorgias is a study of sophism, the sophists, right, who were essentially the K Street of ancient Athens, was this group of the sophists. So in this dialogue, we have Socrates meeting Gorgias, and Gorgias is somebody who essentially dishes up rhetoric and slogans that and put it on to the average working people. So let's just reject the fiscal cliff. I would say the following right now. The situation is this. You have within the Republican Party about 40 to 50 members of the House of Representatives especially. These are right-wing reactionary extremists. In most countries of the world, they would be immediately identified as fascists. And I think we might as well do that here too. And their guiding principle, they have a shibboleth, which they intend to maintain, and it is that the privileges of the ruling elite are inviolable, that not one penny of tax revenue can come from the rich and the super rich, and they have to cloak this with a general opposition to tax rates. But essentially what they're saying is we're the elite and we don't pay. Now, interestingly enough, Wall Street, generally speaking, is the cause of any fiscal shortfalls. It's that Wall Street as an institution and Wall Street as the creators of this derivatives depression that we're in and have been in since 2007. You look at the main Wall Street zombie banks, and I've written an article about this, which people can see at Tarpley.net. You look at Bank of America, Citibank, General Electric, which is a hedge fund, right? It's not an industrial corporation anymore. You look at Wells Fargo, you look at Goldman Sachs, and what you see is that they pay virtually nothing in federal.
Dr. Tarpley, thank you so much for sharing your time with us tonight. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Vox. How are you?
I'm okay. It's I'm very honored to have you here, and I'm a little excited about tonight's show, I have to admit.
Well,
I'd like to talk.
We have to clear the Hegelian baggage and lumber out of the way. I think people should recall that Hegel was really a very reactionary guy. He was, by all odds, somebody who worked together very closely with Prince Metternich of Austria, who was the centerpiece of these restored monarchies and reactionary regimes in Austria, the Austrian Empire, in Prussia, and in Russia, right? The so-called Holy Alliance. And Hegel is pretty much somebody who represents the Holy Alliance in philosophy, except that he's got this tremendous soft spot for Rousseau. So I really don't think that very many people in the U.S. ruling class have ever learned anything about Hegel, but certainly.
Well, I don't think they have to. I mean, it's clear that now, whether or not they consciously are adhering to this Hegelian dialectic. Actually, Hegel never actually uttered the phrase thesis, antithesis, synthesis.
Right.
He actually never said that. We've put that into his mouth, actually. But I think that it's pretty clear to the ruling class that you can't just get what you want. You have to do.
Powerful circles can use. Now, the relevant point is this fiscal cliff is a fraud from beginning to end. And this term, I am sure, was developed by somebody like Frank Luntz, right? If you look at Gorgias in the old Plato dialogue, and you look at this word monger, perception monger, Frank Luntz, right? The reactionary focus group guy who, he says, don't call it capitalism, call it free enterprise, and he's got all this other advice. The term fiscal cliff is designed to stampede people. It's designed to frighten them, and it's the person who introduced it. I don't think he developed it, but he introduced it. That is, of course, Helicopter Ben Bernanke, the head of the Federal Reserve, who began talking about the fiscal cliff almost a year ago. And the goal of this is to use a largely artificial emergency, which has been artificially created, to be sure, and to try to use that to extract concessions in the direction of genocidal austerity, killer cuts against the American people in the federal budget, which is what this ruling elite wants. The problem with the ruling elite is that they've been screaming about deficits and debt. And here, of course, is a package that will indeed go far towards having some impact on deficits and debt, at least in the very short run. But this is not what they really want. They want austerity that shifts the cost of the depression off the backs of the financiers and zombie bankers and hedge fund hyenas who have created this situation. Full corporate income tax. Now, this is one that seems to have gotten completely lost, right? We're only talking about federal income tax on individuals in this fiscal cliff hysteria. But we ought to think about this other form of taxation, right? The tax on corporations. There's a federal corporate income tax on corporate profits, which is supposed to be 35%. But, surprise, surprise, these zombie banks, in addition to getting subsidies from the TARP, the Treasury, and 0% credit from the Federal Reserve, they also pay no taxes, or 1% or 2%. 1 year, General Electric paid minus 43%. In other words, they got back more from the federal government. So this is a huge area to eliminate the loopholes in the corporate income tax. But, of course, that is a very difficult process. So the direct solution is the Wall Street sales tax. And the difference is this. Once you're talking about profits, corporations will find tax shelters. They'll find jips, dodges, deals, scams, tax evasion, embezzlement, the LIBOR complex, this entire thing. But what really cannot be hidden are transactions on, futures, options, indices. Those have to go over exchanges, right? Largely the ones in Chicago, the futures and options exchanges in Chicago. So all of that pays no tax. The average person pays, depending on your state, from